Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a topic that, honestly, you probably wouldn't have survived in the past the brutal reality of ancient legal systems. Seriously, if you think navigating modern bureaucracy is tough, try doing it when justice was decided by divine intervention, your social status dictated your rights, and punishments were public spectacles. Tonight, we're going to dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum and ease into a journey through history where law was, well, a cruel cradle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's begin. You're standing in a bustling ancient city. Let's say Babylon around 1754 BCE, under the reign of King Hammurabi. The air is thick with the scent of spices, dust, and human activity. You hear the chatter of merchants, the lowing of livestock, and the distant cries of street vendors. But beneath the surface of this vibrant urban life lies a legal system that is, by modern standards, profoundly arbitrary and often terrifyingly brutal. This isn't a world of nuanced legal arguments or presumption of innocence. It's a place where the law is often a blunt instrument, wielded by the powerful, and its consequences are swift and severe. Imagine you're a simple farmer, perhaps named Urdnama, and your neighbor, Enlilbani, accuses you of stealing his ox. There's no complex investigation, no forensic evidence, no jury of your peers. Instead, you might be subjected to an ordeal by water. You're taken to the Euphrates River, your hands bound, and thrown into the churning currents. If you sink, you're guilty, swallowed by the river as a sign of divine judgment. If you float, you're innocent, deemed worthy by the gods. The logic is chillingly simple, terrifyingly fatal. Your fate is left to the whims of a capricious river, not the reasoned judgment of men. This isn't just a legal proceeding, it's a divine lottery. And your life is the prize. The famous Code of Hammurabi, etched onto massive stone steles, might seem impressive at first glance, promising order and justice. But look closer. Its principles are often rooted in lex talionis, the law of retaliation, or an eye for an eye. If you put out the eye of a nobleman, your eye would be put out. Sounds fair. Right. But here's the catch. The punishment often depended entirely on your social status. If you put out the eye of a commoner, you only had to pay a fine. If you put out the eye of a slave, it was an even smaller fine. Justice wasn't blind. It was keenly aware of your place in the social hierarchy. It's like a legal system with VIP lanes, and you're always stuck in traffic. Consider the plight of the poor or the enslaved. You're a slave in ancient Rome, perhaps in the sprawling city itself around 100 CE. You have virtually no legal rights. You are considered property, a chattel, no different from a tool or a beast of burden. If your owner accuses you of a crime, your testimony might be extracted through torture, regardless of your guilt or innocence. You could be beaten, branded, or even put to death with little to no legal recourse. Your life, your body, your very existence were entirely at the whim of your owner. This isn't just injustice, it's the systematic dehumanization of an entire class of people. Historians still meticulously piece together the daily lives and legal vulnerabilities of Roman slaves, often relying on inscriptions, legal texts, and archaeological findings to understand their harsh reality. Now, let's move to ancient Greece. Specifically Athens in the 5th century BCE, the supposed cradle of democracy. While citizens enjoyed certain rights, if you were an alien resident, a medic, or a woman, or a slave, your legal standing was severely diminished. If you, as a medic, were involved in a legal dispute, you often couldn't represent yourself. You needed a citizen sponsor, someone to speak for you. Your rights were granted, not inherent, and could be revoked at any time. It's like needing a powerful friend just to get a hearing. And if that friend abandons you, you're utterly alone. Even for citizens. The legal process could be bewildering. Imagine being accused of a crime in Athenian court. There were no professional lawyers as we know them. You had to argue your own case, relying on rhetoric and persuasion, or hire a speechwriter to craft your defense. The juries could be enormous, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of citizens, making rational deliberation difficult. Popular opinion, personal biases, and powerful speeches often swayed the verdict more than objective evidence. It's like having your fate decided by a public popularity contest, where eloquent lies could trump uncomfortable truths. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to court without a good speech. Let me tell you, consider the widespread use of corporal punishment and public shaming. In many ancient systems, the goal wasn't just to punish the individual, but to deter others through fear. You might be flogged in the public square, branded on your face, or have a limb severed for theft. These gruesome spectacles were common, designed to send a chilling message to anyone contemplating a similar transgression. Justice was not just a legal process, it was a theatrical performance of terror, enacted for the entire community. It's like a perpetual, terrifying reality show, and you're always afraid of being cast. And what about the concept of collective responsibility in some ancient tribal or clan-based systems? If one member of your family or clan committed a crime, the entire group could be held accountable. This could lead to blood feuds, where revenge was sought against any member of the offending family. Your personal innocence mattered little. Your family connection determined your guilt by association. It's like being punished for something your distant cousin did, simply because you share a last name. So, as you reflect on the arbitrary nature of trials, the unequal application of laws, the brutal punishments, and the pervasive lack of individual rights, you begin to grasp the truly awful reality of ancient legal systems. They were designed for control, for order, and for the maintenance of power, with fairness and compassion often taking a distant backseat. It makes you profoundly grateful for the protections, however imperfect, of modern legal systems and the very idea of justice for all. You're still within the ancient world, perhaps now in ancient Egypt, specifically Memphis around 1250 BCE. Under the pharaoh Ramesses II, the colossal statues and towering temples speak of immense power. But beneath this grandeur lies a legal system that is, at its heart, a tool for the powerful, with little true protection for you, the common person. This isn't a system designed for universal equity. It's meticulously crafted to maintain the status quo, ensuring that the elite remain elite, and those at the bottom stay precisely where they are. Imagine you're a simple farmer, perhaps named Hori, diligently working your plot of land along the Nile. Your life, your livelihood, your very existence are utterly dependent on the stability of the harvest and the benevolent or not so benevolent oversight of the local scribe or noble who manages the land for the pharaoh. If you have a dispute with a fellow farmer, you might take it to the village elders or a local official. But if your grievance is with a high-ranking official, a priest, or a wealthy landowner, the scales of justice tilt dramatically against you. The law, in essence, protects its own. It's like trying to win a chess game when your opponent controls all the pieces, and you only have pawns. The written laws, though comprehensive for their time, like those found in the Egyptian legal texts, were often interpreted and applied by officials who were themselves part of the ruling class. There was no independent judiciary, no separation of powers. A judge might also be an administrator, a tax collector, or even a military officer. Their loyalty was to the pharaoh and the established order, not necessarily to abstract principles of justice for every individual. This inherent conflict of interest meant that legal outcomes were heavily influenced by who you knew, how much power you wielded, or how much wealth you possessed. Historians still debate the true accessibility of justice for common Egyptians, noting that while mechanisms existed, the power imbalance was undeniable. Consider the concept of privilege. If you were a noble, a priest, or a high-ranking military officer in ancient Rome, the law often treated you with a remarkable degree of leniency. You might face a lighter sentence, be spared corporal punishment, or even have your crimes overlooked entirely. Your social standing acted as a shield, deflecting the harshest blows of the legal system. But for you, the ordinary citizen, the laborer, or the recent immigrant in, say, Rome's crowded Suburra district, the full, unsparing force of the law was brought to bear. There were clear distinctions in punishment based on social status, a concept that would be abhorrent in modern justice systems. It's like playing a game where the rules change based on your surname, and you always get the short end of the stick. Now, imagine a dispute over land. You've been working a small plot, perhaps in ancient Mesopotamia, claiming it as your family's for generations. But a powerful temple official decides he wants that land for a new project. He has scribes, he has influence. He has the ear of the local governor. You, a simple farmer, have only your word and your calloused hands. The legal battle would be an uphill, almost impossible struggle. The very structure of the legal system was designed to protect and expand the holdings of the powerful, often at the expense of the voiceless majority. It's like trying to argue with a large corporation when they own the legal system and all the evidence. Let's talk about corruption. While not always explicitly sanctioned, the potential for bribery and undue influence was rife in ancient legal systems. A judge or official, poorly paid or ambitious, might easily be swayed by gifts or favors from a wealthy litigant. You, with your meager possessions, would have no means to counter such influence. Your justice might be bought and sold before you even stepped foot in a courtroom. It's a chilling thought your fate decided not by facts, but by the size of someone else's purse. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to court empty-handed, let me tell you. Even the very act of accessing the law was often a privilege. Legal texts were written in complex scripts, often only understood by a select few scribes, priests, and the educated elite. There were no public defenders, no free legal clinics. If you needed legal advice, you had to pay for it, often beyond the means of the common person. This created a barrier, effectively disenfranchising the poor and ensuring that only those with resources could fully navigate the intricate legal landscape. It's like having all the laws written in a language you don't understand, and the only translators charge exorbitant fees. Consider the pervasive nature of patronage networks in ancient societies like Rome. If you were a commoner, your access to power, influence, and even justice often came through a wealthy and influential patron. Your patron would represent your interests, speak on your behalf, and use their connections to help you in legal matters. While this offered a form of protection, it also meant your rights were not inherent. They were mediated through someone else's power. If your patron fell from favor, or simply abandoned you, your legal standing could vanish overnight. It's like having a powerful guardian angel, but they can decide to stop protecting you at any moment. So, as you ponder the selective application of laws, the pervasive influence of social status, and the inherent biases within ancient legal structures, you begin to grasp that these systems were not designed for universal justice. They were tools wielded by the powerful, for the powerful, ensuring the maintenance of their control and the perpetual subservience of the common person. It makes you profoundly grateful for the ideals, however imperfectly realized, of equal justice under law and the principle that no one is above it. You're trying to navigate the ancient world, where laws bend to the powerful and your status dictates your fate. But now, you find yourself accused, perhaps wrongly, and face an even more terrifying prospect witness wonders and woes. Forget fingerprint analysis, DNA evidence, or even a thorough interrogation. In these ancient legal systems, the methods of gathering evidence were often bizarre, deeply unreliable, and utterly terrifying, leaving your innocence to the whims of superstition or brute force. Imagine you're a common laborer in ancient Sumer, around 2000 BCE, perhaps in the city-state of Ur. You're accused of a minor theft, a few stolen loaves of bread from the marketplace. There are no security cameras, no eyewitnesses, just the accusation of the baker. How do they determine guilt? You might be subjected to a river ordeal. You're marched down to the mighty Tigris or Euphrates, your hands bound and thrown in. If the river accepts you, meaning you drown, you are guilty, and your body is recovered as proof. If the river rejects you, meaning you float, you are innocent. The sheer terror of being plunged into the churning water, your life hanging on whether you can stay afloat, is unimaginable. It's like being forced into a swimming test. But failure means death, and even passing doesn't mean you're safe. Now, let's fast forward to ancient Rome, specifically during the Republic, around 100 BCE. You're a slave, perhaps named Claudia, working in a wealthy household. A valuable item goes missing, and suspicion falls on you. In Roman law, the testimony of a slave was often only admissible if extracted under torture. Imagine being stretched on a rack, or having burning brands applied to your skin, simply to force a confession, regardless of your actual guilt. Your screams are interpreted as signs of guilt. Your silence as stubbornness requiring more pain. The goal isn't to find truth, it's to break you. This isn't just a legal procedure, it's state-sanctioned brutality, designed to terrorize and control. Historians still debate the frequency and efficacy of torture in Roman legal practice. Noting its explicit use as a tool against non-citizens, consider the concept of a compurgation in early medieval Europe, particularly in places like the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that would one day become parts of England or even early Massachusetts. You're accused of a minor offense, perhaps trespassing. Instead of presenting evidence, you gather a certain number of respectable members of the community, your oath helpers or compurgators. These individuals don't testify about the facts of the case. They simply swear an oath that they believe you are telling the truth. Their reputation and social standing are, in effect, the evidence. If you can gather enough people of good standing to swear on your behalf, you are acquitted. It's like a popularity contest deciding your guilt, where your friends vouching for you is more important than actual facts. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to court without some well-respected friends. Let me tell you, and what about eyewitness testimony in a world without forensic science? Imagine a theft in ancient Athens, 400 BCE. You claim to have seen the culprit, but without proper investigative techniques, the credibility of an eyewitness was often based on their social status, their relationship to the accused, or their perceived honesty, rather than objective observation. Memory is fallible, biases are prevalent, and the concept of cross-examination was often rudimentary. The truth could easily be obscured by flawed perception or personal vendettas. It's like relying on a game of telephone to solve a crime, where the original message gets distorted with every retelling. Let's talk about the use of omens and divination. In many ancient cultures, from Babylon to the early communities of Native American tribes, though, their systems varied greatly from the more punitive European models. The will of the gods or spirits was sought to determine guilt. This could involve examining the entrails of sacrificed animals, observing the flight of birds, or interpreting dreams. The outcome of your legal dispute might hinge on a priest's interpretation of a natural phenomenon, rather than any logical assessment of facts. It's a chilling thought, your freedom or your life, dependent on whether a bird flies left or right. The very idea of a fair trial, as we understand it today, was largely absent. There was no presumption of innocence. Often, the accusation itself carried significant weight. The burden of proof might fall entirely on the accused to demonstrate their innocence, rather than on the accuser to prove guilt. This inverted justice system made it incredibly difficult to defend yourself, especially if you lacked resources, influence, or the ability to endure torture. It's like being forced to prove a negative, a task that's almost impossible when everyone assumes the worst. So, as you reflect on the terrifying river ordeals, the brutal torture, the social oath helpers, and the reliance on omens, you begin to grasp the truly unreliable and often horrifying methods used to determine truth and guilt in ancient legal systems. Justice was a lottery, a performance, or an act of sheer force, far removed from the rational, evidence-based systems we strive for today. It makes you profoundly grateful for forensic science, the presumption of innocence, and the principle that truth, not superstition or pain, should be the ultimate arbiter of justice. You've experienced the terror of ancient legal accusations and the bizarre methods of proving guilt. But what happened after a verdict was reached? For those found guilty, the reality was often a horrifying spectacle of punishment's public spectacle. Forget about quiet incarceration or rehabilitation. In ancient times, the goal was not just to punish the individual, but to instill fear, assert power, and publicly reinforce societal norms through gruesome displays. Imagine you're in ancient Rome, perhaps in the bustling Forum Romanum around 70 CE. You're jostling through the crowds, the air filled with the cries of vendors and the murmur of conversation. Suddenly, the crowd parts, and a procession begins. A condemned criminal, perhaps a thief or a perjurer, is being led through the streets. He might be flogged, his back a bloody mess, or perhaps he carries a heavy wooden furka of V-shaped yoke around his neck, marking him as a public example. This isn't just a walk of shame, it's a deliberate public degradation, designed to strip away all dignity. It's like a macabre parade, and everyone is both spectator and participant in the enforcement of fear. Consider the various forms of corporal punishment. In many ancient legal systems, from Babylon to early Anglo-Saxon England, physical mutilation was a common penalty. If you stole, your hand might be severed. If you bore false witness, your tongue could be cut out. These punishments were not just painful, they were permanent, visible markers of your crime, ensuring that you carried the stigma for the rest of your life. Imagine trying to live, to work, to find acceptance in a society when your body itself is a constant billboard of your past transgression. Historians still meticulously examine skeletal remains and legal texts to understand the prevalence and types of physical mutilation used as punishment in different ancient cultures. Now, let's talk about the ultimate public spectacle execution. In ancient societies, executions were rarely private affairs. They were often performed in prominent public spaces, drawing large crowds, serving as a grim warning. In ancient Rome, criminals might be crucified along major roads, left to die slowly as a gruesome deterrent for all travelers. In other cultures, beheadings, hangings, or stoning were common. The goal was to maximize visibility and terror. The screams, the blood, the dying gasps. These were all part of the lesson for the populace. It's like a mandatory, horrifying theater performance, and you're forced to attend. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to the town square on execution day. Let me tell you, imagine the psychological impact of living in a society where such brutal public punishments were commonplace. Every time you walked through the marketplace, you might see the aftermath of a flogging or a branded face. This constant exposure to violence and degradation fostered a pervasive climate of fear, discouraging dissent and reinforcing obedience to the ruling power. It instilled a sense of fragility, a constant awareness that one wrong move could lead to public humiliation or agonizing death. It's like living under a constant, unspoken threat, always on edge. Let's consider the humiliation rituals. Even for lesser offenses, public shaming was a powerful tool. In some ancient Greek city-states, minor offenders might be placed in the stocks or pillory in the agora public square, exposed to the elements and the ridicule of passersby. People might throw rotten food at them, shout insults, or simply stare with contempt. This destruction of reputation, this public stripping away of dignity, could be as psychologically damaging as physical pain. And for some, even worse. It's like being trapped in a live-streamed viral video, but with no way to turn off the comments. And the shame lasts a lifetime? And what about the families of the condemned? They, too, often faced public shame and ostracization. A son's crime could bring dishonor upon his parents. A father's transgression could blight the prospects of his children. The stain of punishment often extended beyond the individual, acting as a form of collective social control. It was a secondary, yet powerful, layer of deterrence, ensuring that families would exert pressure on their members to conform. It's like having your entire family's reputation ruined by one person's mistake. And everyone knows it. Even in societies that eventually developed prisons, like ancient Rome's carcer prison, these were often places of detention before trial or execution, not places of long-term rehabilitation or punishment. Incarceration as a primary form of punishment, with the aim of reforming the criminal, is a relatively modern concept. For the ancients, the body was the primary target of justice, either through physical pain or public elimination. It was a swift, brutal, and visible system of maintaining order. So, as you envision the public floggings, the severed limbs, and the grim specters of execution, you begin to grasp the truly horrifying reality of ancient legal punishments. They were not just about retribution, they were about terrifying the populace into submission, making bodies into lessons, and ensuring that the power of the law was felt in the deepest parts of society. It makes you profoundly grateful for the evolution of our legal systems, for the concept of rehabilitation, and for the simple fact that justice is no longer a public spectacle of terror. You've witnessed the terror of public punishments and the inherent biases of ancient legal systems. But now, let's turn to a more insidious, yet equally devastating threat that could utterly destroy your life and the lives of your family debt's deadly chains. Forget about bankruptcy courts or consumer protection laws. In the ancient world, a single loan could lead to literal enslavement, trapping individuals in a cycle of servitude that stretched across generations. Imagine you're a small farmer in ancient Greece, perhaps in Attica around 600 BCE, struggling against poor harvests and mounting debts. You owe money to a wealthy aristocrat, perhaps for seeds, tools, or simply to survive a lean winter. You can't pay. Under the prevalent legal codes of the time, including those that led to social unrest and the reforms of Solon, your very body, and the bodies of your family, could become collateral. If you defaulted on your loan, you, your wife, and your children could be forced into debt slavery. Hectomoroi was a form of serfdom where debtors paid a sixth of their produce as rent. But full debt slavery was also common. This wasn't abstract financial ruin. It was a physical, inescapable bondage. It's like taking out a mortgage on your house. But if you miss a payment, the bank owns you and your entire family. Consider the desperate struggle to avoid this fate. You would work tirelessly, often beyond the limits of human endurance, just to make enough to pay off your creditors. Every extra hour, every meager surplus, went towards staving off the inevitable. The constant pressure, the gnawing fear of losing your freedom, would have been a pervasive, soul-crushing burden. You're not working to build wealth, you're working to avoid becoming someone else's property. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to the market with nothing to sell, let me tell you. Now, let's move to ancient Rome, specifically during the early Republic, around 450 BCE. The conflict between the plebeians' common people and the patricians' aristocracy was often fueled by the harsh laws of debt. The law of the 12 tables, while a step towards codified law, still allowed for debtors to be seized by their creditors. If you were a plebeian farmer, and you couldn't pay your debts, you could be subjected to addiction, a legal process where you were formally handed over to your creditor, effectively becoming their slave nexus. Your creditor could then put you to work, sell you, or even, theoretically, execute you. Though this was rare, this wasn't a temporary setback, it was a permanent descent into the lowest rung of society. Erasing your freedom and dignity? Historians still debate the precise mechanisms and frequency of debt bondage in early Rome, highlighting its significant role in social unrest and legal reforms. Imagine the ripple effect through your family. If the father of a family became a debt slave, his children often inherited that status. This meant that a single misstep, a single season of bad crops, could condemn not just you, but future generations to a life of servitude. There was no escape, no way to buy back your freedom if you had no means. The chains of debt were not just physical, they were intergenerational, binding your descendants to a fate they never chose. It's like having a family curse, but it's entirely economic. Let's talk about the lack of any real safety net. There were no social welfare programs, no unemployment benefits, no government assistance for the impoverished. If you lost your land due to debt, or if you became too ill to work, your options were terrifyingly limited. You might resort to begging, a life of complete destitution, or sell yourself or your children into slavery as a last resort to survive. The legal system, far from offering protection, often facilitated this downward spiral, allowing creditors immense power over their debtors. It's like falling into a deep pit, and the legal system just keeps digging it deeper. Consider the psychological toll, the constant anxiety of debt, the fear of losing everything, and the profound humiliation of becoming a slave would have been immense. Your sense of self-worth, your dignity, would be utterly stripped away. You were no longer a free individual but a piece of property, valued only for your labor. This loss of autonomy, this complete subjugation, marked a profound breaking of the human spirit. It's enough to make you profoundly grateful for modern financial regulations and the concept of a safety net, however imperfect. So, as you reflect on the chilling reality of debt slavery, the utter lack of protection for the vulnerable, and the permanent stain it left on individuals and families, you begin to grasp the truly awful consequences of ancient legal systems where financial woes could mean the literal loss of freedom. It makes you profoundly grateful for bankruptcy laws, for protections against predatory lending, and for the simple, fundamental right to your own body and labor. You've narrowly escaped the literal chains of debt, but in the ancient world, your identity was not solely your own. Instead, you were inextricably bound to your lineage, your clan, your kin, and that meant facing family feuds, formal fates. Forget about individual responsibility or simply moving away to escape your relatives. In these systems, the actions of one family member could bring devastating consequences upon the entire clan, forcing you into conflicts you never chose. Imagine you're living in ancient Israel, perhaps in a rural village during the time of Judges, around 1100 BCE. Your cousin, a hot-headed young man, gets into a dispute with a member of a neighboring clan over a water source. The argument escalates, and your cousin, in a moment of rage, takes a life. In this society, blood revenge Goel Hadam was not just permitted, it was often a social expectation. The victim's family had the right, even the duty, to seek vengeance against the killer, or even a member of his family. You, entirely innocent, could become a target simply because you shared blood with the perpetrator. It's like being drafted into a never-ending gang war. And your membership card is your family name. Consider the overwhelming importance of family honor. In cultures like ancient Rome, particularly among the patrician class, your family's reputation dignitas was paramount. If a family member committed a crime, or brought shame upon the name, the entire lineage suffered. This wasn't just about social embarrassment, it could affect political standing, marriage alliances, and even economic opportunities. Families would go to extreme lengths, sometimes even resorting to internal punishment or dishonoring a member to cleanse the family name. It's like living under a constant, crushing pressure to uphold an ancestral reputation, where one wrong move by a relative could ruin everyone. Historians still extensively debate the specific mechanisms and social pressures of blood feuds and honor cultures in various ancient societies, noting their role in maintaining social order outside formal legal structures. Now, let's talk about the rigid concept of collective guilt. In many ancient legal systems, the idea that a crime was committed by an individual who alone deserved punishment was often secondary to the notion that the entire group was implicated. If a village harbored a criminal, or if a family refused to surrender one of their own, the entire village or family could face collective punishment, fines, destruction of property, or even death. Imagine living in a constant state of suspicion, knowing that your neighbor's transgression, or even your own relative's secret act, could bring down the wrath of the authorities on everyone you know. It's like living in a community where everyone gets detention if one kid misbehaves. Let's think about the formal fates of women within these family-centric systems. You're a young woman in ancient Babylon, and your family has a dispute with another family. The resolution might involve marriage as a peace treaty, You could be married off to a member of the opposing family, not for love, but to mend a rift, to solidify an alliance, or to prevent a blood feud from escalating. Your personal feelings are utterly irrelevant. Your fate is decided by the needs of your family. Your role simply to be a pawn in their political and social maneuvers. It's like being a diplomatic asset, exchanged to keep the peace between warring factions. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to the family meeting with strong opinions. Let me tell you. And what about the constant pressure of ancestral expectations? In societies that emphasized lineage, like ancient China with its focus on filial piety and ancestral worship, you were expected to live up to the glory or shame of your ancestors. Your actions reflected not just on yourself, but on the long line of those who came before you. This could be a powerful motivator for good behavior, but also an immense burden, a constant reminder that your life was not just your own, but a continuation of a familial legacy. It's like having your entire family tree watching your every move, silently judging. Consider the lack of individual autonomy in choosing your own legal or social path. Your rights, your obligations, your very identity were often determined by your family's standing, their history, and their current relationships. If your family was powerful, you enjoyed privileges. If they were disgraced, you suffered the consequences. There was no escaping the shadow or the light of your family's collective fate. It's a literal and metaphorical chain, binding you to those you shared blood with, for better or worse. So, as you ponder the ancient world's emphasis on family honor, collective guilt, and the devastating consequences of feuds, you begin to grasp the profound difference in legal and social identity. Your individual self was often secondary to the larger, all-encompassing entity of your family or clan. It makes you profoundly grateful for the modern legal principle of individual responsibility and the freedom to forge your own path, independent of your relatives' actions or missteps. You're trying to navigate the complexities of ancient family dynamics, where your kin's actions can dictate your fate. But now, let's confront a particularly harsh truth embedded in these historical legal systems, gender's grim verdicts. Forget about equal rights or even basic fairness. In this past, your legal standing, your protections, and your very humanity were often profoundly dictated by your gender, your status as a slave, or your place on the margins of society. Imagine you're a woman in ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps in the city of Ur around 2000 BCE. While some legal codes, like Hammurabi's, offered women a few rights regarding property or divorce, these were often limited and far from equal to men's. If you were accused of adultery, you might be thrown into the river or subjected to other severe punishments, while a man might face far less scrutiny or even none at all. Your reputation, your virginity before marriage, and your fidelity within it were paramount, and any perceived transgression could bring swift and brutal consequences, often decided without your direct input. It's like living under a constant moral microscope, where every flaw is magnified, and only your flaws truly matter. Consider the almost complete lack of legal personhood for slaves in virtually all ancient societies. You're a slave in ancient Rome, perhaps in Ephesus or Carthage, owned by a wealthy merchant. You have no legal rights whatsoever. You cannot own property, cannot marry legally, cannot enter into contracts, and cannot testify in court unless tortured. If you are harmed, it is not considered an assault on a person, but damage to property, and the legal recourse belongs to your owner, not to you. Your existence is entirely at the whim of your master, and the law actively reinforces this brutal reality. It's like being an object, not a human, and the legal system treats you as such. Historians still extensively research the nuances of slave laws across various ancient empires, highlighting the pervasive dehumanization embedded within these codes. Now, let's talk about women's property rights. In many ancient legal systems, once a woman married, her property often became her husband's. She might not be able to inherit land directly, or conduct business, or represent herself in legal matters without a male guardian or her husband's permission. Even if she brought a dowry, it often passed into her husband's control. Her economic power, and thus her ability to act independently, was severely curtailed by the legal framework. Imagine living in a world where everything you own, everything you earned, legally belonged to someone else. It's like having a bank account that only your husband can access. And he decides when, or if, you get any money. Let's think about the legal vulnerabilities of marginalized groups. If you were a foreigner in an ancient city-state like Athens, you often lacked full citizen rights. You might not be able to own land, participate in political life, or have the same legal protections as a citizen. If you were involved in a dispute with a citizen, the legal system would inherently favor the citizen. This meant that while you might live and work in the community, you were always on the periphery, legally inferior and often exploited. It's like living in a country where you're a second-class citizen, and the laws treat you differently just because of your origin. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to court without a powerful citizen sponsor. Let me tell you, and what about the concept of justice for victims of sexual violence? In many ancient legal systems, the focus was often not on the consent or bodily autonomy of the victim, but on the violation of male property rights, the father's or husband's honor. The punishment for rape, if it was even recognized as a severe crime, might involve a fine paid to the male guardian, or forced marriage to the perpetrator, rather than justice for the survivor. The legal system often compounded the trauma, treating the victim as property rather than an individual whose rights had been violated. It's a grim reminder of how deeply patriarchal these systems were. Consider the legal invisibility of children, especially in cases of abuse or neglect. While children were valued for their future labor or lineage, they had few, if any, legal rights, independent of their parents or guardians. If a child was severely mistreated, there was no concept of child protective services or a legal mechanism to intervene on their behalf. Their welfare was entirely at the discretion of the head of the household, often with no legal oversight. It's like growing up in a world where your well-being is entirely dependent on the goodwill of your parents, with no one to step in if that goodwill vanishes. So, as you ponder the deeply ingrained biases against women, the dehumanization of slaves, and the legal marginalization of foreigners, you begin to grasp the truly grim verdicts rendered by ancient legal systems based on gender and social status. Justice was not a universal principle. It was a privilege, selectively applied and profoundly influenced by who you were born as, rather than what you had done. It makes you profoundly grateful for the long, hard-fought battles for civil rights, for equality before the law, and for the ongoing pursuit of justice for all individuals, regardless of their background or identity. You've seen the biases and the brutality inherent in ancient legal systems, but now, prepare for a method of justice that defies all logic and reason, relying instead on pure chance and supposed divine intervention, the ordeal's arbitrary outcome. Forget about evidence, testimonies, or rational deliberation. In this chilling reality, your guilt or innocence was determined by whether you survived fire, water, or a poisoned chalice. Imagine you're accused of a serious crime, perhaps perjury or theft, in early medieval Europe? Let's say in a Germanic kingdom that would one day become part of Germany, or even an early colonial settlement in Massachusetts, influenced by ancient practices. The evidence against you is weak, circumstantial at best, but instead of a jury, you face an ordeal by hot iron. A piece of iron, perhaps a plowshare, is heated until it glows red. You are forced to carry it for a prescribed distance, or perhaps touch it with your bare hand. After 3 days, your hand is examined. If it has healed cleanly, you are innocent, deemed favored by God. If it shows signs of blistering or infection, you are guilty, condemned by divine judgment. The agony, the terror, the sheer irrationality of your fate resting on whether a wound heals quickly or gets infected is almost unbearable. It's like a twisted game of hot potato, where the potato can kill you, and divine intervention is the only referee. Consider the ordeal by cold water, which we touched on briefly earlier. You're accused of witchcraft in 17th century Salem, Massachusetts. You are bound, often with your right thumb tied to your left big toe, and thrown into a body of water. Typically a pond or river. If you float, you are guilty, as pure water was believed to reject you, indicating you were unnatural and in league with evil. If you sink, you are innocent, accepted by the water, but you might very well drown in the process. The horrifying dilemma: prove your innocence by dying, or live, condemned as a witch, facing execution. This isn't justice, it's a no-win scenario, engineered by fear and superstition. Historians still extensively analyze the psychological and social factors that led to the widespread use and eventual decline of trials by ordeal, highlighting their role in communities where evidence was scarce and belief in divine intervention strong. Now, let's talk about the ordeal of the poisoned chalice. Though less common in Western Europe, such practices were found in various ancient societies, including parts of ancient India and Africa. You're accused of a crime, and you're forced to drink a concoction known to be poisonous or induce powerful purging. If you vomit or fall ill, you are guilty. If you retain the liquid without ill effect, you are innocent. The sheer physiological horror, the knowledge that you are deliberately ingesting a potentially fatal substance, makes this an ordeal of extreme terror. It's like being forced to play Russian roulette with your stomach, and the bullet is a toxic brew. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to court thirsty. Let me tell you, imagine the complete lack of individual agency in these trials. You couldn't argue your case, present evidence, or appeal to logic. Your fate was literally in the hands of a higher power, or rather, in the interpretation of a ritual by a priest or judge. Your innocence hinged on physical reactions to extreme stress or dangerous substances, not on rational investigation. This stripped away all personal control, leaving you utterly helpless before an arbitrary force. It's like having your entire future decided by a coin toss, but the coin is weighted against you. Let's think about the role of the church in legitimizing these ordeals. For centuries, the church sanctioned and even administered these trials, believing they were direct manifestations of God's judgment. Priests would bless the hot iron or the water, imbuing the ordeal with divine authority. This gave the verdicts an undeniable, terrifying legitimacy in the minds of the people, making any challenge to the outcome an act of blasphemy. It's a powerful testament to the intertwining of law and religion in these ancient societies, where faith superseded reason, even when ordeals were eventually replaced by more rational legal systems. The underlying mindset that God would reveal the truth lingered. The concept of judicial combat, where two parties would fight a duel to determine guilt, believing God would grant victory to the righteous, persisted in some areas for centuries. It's a less passive ordeal, perhaps, but no less arbitrary, turning legal disputes into violent contests of strength and supposed divine favor. It's like settling a lawsuit with a fistfight, and the winner is deemed legally correct. The sheer unpredictability of these outcomes made life incredibly precarious. An innocent person, perhaps simply more prone to infection or less robust, could easily be condemned. A guilty person, if physically strong or lucky, might escape punishment. Justice became a lottery, a terrifying game of chance where the rules were opaque and the stakes were always life or death. The very notion of fairness, as we understand it, was entirely absent. So, as you ponder the terrifying ordeals of fire, water, and poison, you begin to grasp the truly arbitrary and horrifying nature of justice in these ancient legal systems. Your life and your freedom hinged on superstitions and physiological responses, not on reasoned judgment or objective evidence. It makes you profoundly grateful for the scientific method, for the meticulous gathering of facts, and for the slow, often painful, evolution towards legal systems built on principles of reason and fairness, rather than divine whim. You've witnessed the terrifying ordeals and the brutal biases of ancient legal systems. But even if you survived such a trial, another profound challenge presented itself: the dizzying, often arbitrary reality of law beyond the land. Forget about universal rights or a unified legal code that applies across an entire nation. In the ancient world, laws often varied wildly between regions, cities, and even social groups, offering no consistent sense of justice or predictable rights. Imagine you're a merchant traveling across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire in 200 CE, perhaps from Alexandria, Egypt, making your way to Antioch, Syria, and then further north to Gaul, modern-day France. What is legal in one province might be frowned upon, or even a crime, in another. Different cities, even within the same empire, might have their own local ordinances, their own customs, and their own interpretations of broader imperial laws. You carry your goods, but you also carry a constant anxiety, the fear of inadvertently breaking a local rule you don't even know exists. It's like trying to drive across the United States, but every state has completely different, unwritten traffic laws, and penalties vary wildly. Consider the concept of personal law versus territorial law. In many ancient empires, your legal standing and the laws that apply to you might depend on your ethnicity, your religion, or your tribal affiliation, rather than simply the physical territory you were in. For example, in parts of the Roman Empire, different legal systems coexisted for Roman citizens, Latin citizens, peregrines-free non-citizens, and various religious groups. Imagine being a Jew living in Roman Judea. You might be governed by different religious laws for personal matters, while Roman imperial law applied to criminal offenses. This complexity meant that what was a right for one person might be a crime for another, even if they stood side by side. Historians still meticulously study the complex interplay of personal and territorial law in ancient empires, highlighting how these layered systems often reflected and reinforced social hierarchies. Now, let's talk about the sheer difficulty of knowing the law. Legal codes, when they existed in written form, were often inscribed on stone tablets in public squares, or contained in scrolls accessible only to scribes, priests, and the educated elite. There were no easily digestible legal handbooks, no widespread education in the law for the common person. You, the ordinary citizen, relied on tradition, custom, and the interpretations of local officials, who themselves might have varying levels of understanding or integrity. This ignorance of the law was rarely a valid defense. It's like being expected to follow a rulebook that's written in a dead language, locked away in a vault, and only interpreted by a select few. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to a new city without a very trusted local guide. Let me tell you, imagine the absence of legal precedent as we understand it today. While some ancient systems developed a form of case law, the consistent application of rulings from past cases to new ones was often not as formalized or widely disseminated. A judge in one city might rule differently than a judge in another, even on similar facts, because there was no centralized system of binding precedent. This contributed to the arbitrary nature of justice, making it difficult to predict outcomes or challenge unfavorable rulings. It's like having judges who constantly make up the rules as they go along, with no obligation to follow what other judges have done. Let's think about the role of local customs and traditions. In many ancient societies, customary law, passed down orally through generations, held as much, if not more, sway than written edicts. These customs could vary drastically from one village to the next, from one valley to another. A practice considered perfectly acceptable in your hometown might be a grave offense just a few miles away. This patchwork of local rules made travel and commerce incredibly risky, as you could easily unwittingly violate a deep-seated tradition and face severe consequences. It's like trying to navigate a minefield where the mines are invisible and placed according to ancient, forgotten maps. Even within cities, different guilds or social groups might have their own internal rules and dispute resolution mechanisms that sometimes superseded or intertwined with the broader city laws. For instance, a merchant guild in ancient Carthage might have its own tribunals for resolving trade disputes among its members, applying specific rules known only to them. This further fragmented the legal landscape, creating pockets of specific legal norms accessible only to initiates. It's like having secret club rules that carry the force of law, but only for members of that club. The constant shifting of political boundaries and conquests also meant legal systems were in flux. When one empire conquered another, the laws could change overnight, or a hybrid system might emerge, creating a complex, often contradictory legal environment. You might wake up one day to find yourself living under a completely new set of rules, imposed by a foreign power, with no understanding of your new rights or obligations. It's like the entire legal framework around you could be swapped out like a stage set, without any warning or explanation. So, as you ponder the fragmented legal maps of the ancient world, the bewildering array of local customs, and the constant fear of unknown transgressions, you begin to grasp that justice was far from a universal, predictable concept. Your legal fate often hinged on the very ground you stood on, or the group you belonged to, creating a patchwork of rights and vulnerabilities. It makes you profoundly grateful for the principles of territorial law, for universal declarations of human rights, and for the relative consistency of legal systems across modern nations. However imperfectly applied, you've navigated the bewildering, often brutal, maze of ancient legal systems, from river ordeals to public floggings, from debt slavery to the stony straitjacket of social class. It's a chilling tapestry of injustice, arbitrary power, and widespread suffering. But now, as our journey through these historical horrors concludes, let's turn our gaze forward, finding a glimmer, a growth, and a modern grace to appreciate the slow, painstaking evolution of legal thought and how far we've truly come. Imagine standing on the steps of the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. today, or perhaps walking through the halls of a courthouse in San Francisco. The very air hums with concepts that would have been alien, even revolutionary. To our ancient counterparts, the presumption of innocence, the right to a fair trial, the idea of due process, and the principle of equal justice under law. These aren't just abstract ideas. They are the bedrock of our modern legal systems. However imperfectly applied, it's like moving from a dimly lit cave to a well-lit chamber, where clarity and reason, not fear, guide the proceedings. Consider the development of codified law that applies to all citizens, regardless of social status. While ancient codes like Hammurabi's existed, their application was often selective, over centuries, driven by social movements, philosophical shifts, and the hard-won battles of ordinary people. Legal systems gradually moved towards the ideal of universality. You, as a common citizen today, have rights and protections that would have been unimaginable to a peasant in ancient Babylon or a slave in Rome. Your testimony is valued, your body is protected from arbitrary torture, and your social standing doesn't dictate your guilt. Historians still meticulously trace the legal lineage from ancient customs to modern constitutional law, highlighting the incremental but profound shifts towards individual rights. Now, let's talk about the concept of impartial judges and juries. No longer is your fate determined by the whim of a lord or the interpretation of an omen. Instead, legal professionals, trained in law, are expected to apply statutes and precedents fairly. And the jury, composed of your peers, offers a collective, deliberative body to weigh evidence and determine facts. While biases can still exist, the ideal of impartiality is foundational, a stark contrast to the arbitrary, often corrupt. Justice of the past. It's like moving from a game where the referee is openly biased to one where the rules are clear, and the officials strive for fairness. You certainly wouldn't want to show up to court without knowing your rights. Let me tell you, imagine the abolition of debt slavery and widespread corporal punishment. The very idea that a financial misstep could lead to physical bondage, or that a crime should be met with public mutilation, is abhorrent to modern sensibilities. The gradual rejection of these practices, often through centuries of struggle and reform, represents a monumental leap forward in human dignity. While incarceration has its own complexities, the shift from public spectacles of terror to the concept of punishment as a deprivation of liberty, with an emphasis ideally on rehabilitation, marks a significant moral evolution. It's like trading a medieval torture chamber for a modern correctional facility. A vast improvement, despite its own flaws. Let's think about the growing recognition of individual rights and autonomy. The ancient world often saw individuals as parts of a larger collective, family, clan, state, with limited independent rights. Modern legal systems, spurred by Enlightenment thought and human rights movements, increasingly prioritize the individual's inherent dignity and freedoms. Your right to free speech, to privacy, to choose your own path, however imperfectly realized, is a fundamental difference from the subjugated existence of the past. It's like being given a passport to your own life, after generations of being bound to your birthplace. Consider the development of legal aid and accessibility. While not perfect, legal systems today strive in varying degrees to provide representation and access to justice for all, regardless of wealth. Public defenders, legal aid organizations, and pro bono services aim to bridge the gap that once allowed wealth to dictate legal outcomes. The knowledge of the law is far more accessible, disseminated through education, media, and public resources. It's like having a universal instruction manual for the legal system, instead of a secret code. So, as you slowly drift into slumber, let the stark contrast of past and present legal systems wash over you. The brutal, arbitrary, and unequal justice of the ancient world serves as a powerful reminder of the precious, hard-won principles that underpin our modern societies. While the pursuit of perfect justice is an ongoing journey, the distance we've traveled from the horrors of ancient legal systems is truly immense. Let that thought bring a sense of calm, a gentle appreciation for the strides we've made, and the quiet, enduring hope for a more just future. As the echoes of ancient verdicts fade, let the gentle hum of your own comfortable night settle around you. The world has changed so much, moving us far from those ancient struggles. Rest easy, knowing how far we've come.